Nope. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our June virtual webinar with Hidden River Middle School. In today's virtual visit, Hidden River will be sharing an in-depth look at multi-tiered system of support, MTSS, a promise to every child. At the Hearing Center for Inclusive Education at the University of Washington, we continue to be thrilled to partner with OSPI in our exemplary demonstration schools. Joining us today is Hidden River Middle School, one of our first 5 in Washington State demonstration sites. We took the feedback from our April webinars where attendees repeatedly mentioned that they wanted to hear more about some of the specific inclusionary practices demonstration sites discussed utilizing in their schools. So we are here today to do just that, take a deep dive into MTSS with the educators from Hidden River Middle School from Monroe, Washington. We would like to introduce to you our Hearing Center team. Here today is Hearing Center Director, Dr. Eileen Schwartz, Inclusion Specialist, Rena Marie Leon Guerrero, myself, who will be leading us through the webinar today, Katie Bateman and Cassie Martin, who will be monitoring our Q&A in the chat. Our program coordinator, Molly Lyman, is also here. She will make sure you have everything you need in case you experience any technological issues. We are also welcoming Jill Locke to our team, who will be working with our demonstration sites on social networking and strategies to collect information about how demonstration sites are impacting visiting schools across all of Washington State. Before we dive in, let's make sure we are set up for the webinar. As we get started, please test your audio at the bottom left-hand corner of the menu to ensure that you can hear us. As the presentation is in a webinar format, all participants are automatically muted and no participant videos are on. Thank you for sharing comments and ideas in the chat. Because of the number of people participating today, we will not be answering questions or responding via the chat throughout, but if you'd like our presenters to answer a question, please use the Q&A feature instead. We will have time for Q&A throughout our webinar, and we'll be reviewing ideas in the chat to do our best to incorporate them into the presentation today to make sure it is as interactive as possible. We will be recording today's webinar, and it will be provided on the Hearing Center's demonstration site's webpage. The recording from today will be available by the end of next week, and all participants will be sent a link to access the webinar and PowerPoint slides. Again, a recording and the presentation will be made available on our website along with accompanying artifacts. As we go through the webinar, please keep this webinar etiquette in mind. We encourage a growth mindset where you are open to thinking about new ideas and willing to push yourself to grow. Thank you for joining us today, for being present, positive, and engaged. Let's practice the chat. In the chat box, please share what you hope to learn about MTSS that you can take away and positively impact inclusion in your schools. We'll be able to reference this information later, and it'll be useful for us in future planning. Good question here. MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, and our team today is going to do a great job explaining that. Right, some people takeaways they are sharing is, what is the starting point? How can we build a strong foundation with staff? Others would like to know about data collection. Many on our team are trying to understand how to re-envision schedules to accommodate intervention and other levels of support. Others would like to learn how to include all students with the needs they have. Thank you, this is great. We encourage everybody to keep sharing in the chat box. And a friendly reminder that if you have questions, we'll do our best to monitor these ongoing and respond in the Q&A, both in written form and in addition to answering as many as possible online. Great, some others have shared, I hope to learn how to help students who need individual supports in the classroom without making them stand out. Also learning some of the practices that have been found successful at middle school level. How does this work with teaming of students? Great, I think everybody's going to get answers to their questions today. To start, here's a little background about the Demonstration Sites project. In the fall of 2019, OSPI launched the Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. The Herring Center partnered with OSPI to coordinate and lead this part of the larger statewide project, creating model demonstration sites that highlight inclusionary practices across Washington state. The Demonstration Sites project was developed to provide educators from around the state with the opportunity to observe inclusionary practices in action, meet with school teams, collect artifacts that aided systems change, and learn about how to implement inclusionary practices in different school contexts. Over the course of 2 years, 16 model demonstration sites across all 9 ESD regions will provide professional development to visiting schools. Our demonstration sites highlight the diversity in our state. They include urban schools, rural schools, and schools in some of our largest and smallest districts across Washington. In collaboration with Herring Center Inclusion Specialists, demonstration sites host visiting schools to showcase high-leverage inclusionary practices. By sharing these practices and opening their doors to teachers, administrators, families, and community members, it allows visitors to see best practices in action and apply them in their schools. At the same time, the demonstration sites themselves continue to grow their inclusive cultures and refine their practices that contribute to equitable learning for all students. There are some founding principles that drive our model demonstration sites work. To start, in every school there are things that are working well. In education, we have the tendency to examine the problems associated with our practices, instead of examining what's working well, why it's working well, and how we can use that information to make things better. This asset-based approach is a productive way for schools to leverage their strengths to become more inclusive. Also, inclusion is not a special education initiative, but is a shift in culture, philosophy, and teaching practices. If we simply change the way we deliver special education services without considering the culture of the school or how all students engage in teaching and learning, we will never make the changes we need to truly impact student learning. Through the course of our webinars, you will hear from demonstration sites that are doing extraordinary things. What is exciting about these schools are that whether they are near one of their journey or 6 years in, they all have plans for continuous improvement. They recognize that as new students enter their buildings and as they collect more information about the best ways students learn, that their professional practices need to reflect that learning. Demonstration sites also know that engaging stakeholders in the reform process is a critical component to making and sustaining changes. When stakeholders are involved, there is a higher likelihood that schools will adopt and implement inclusive practices. Our demonstration sites showcase close partnerships between school leaders and teachers, engaging in true distributive leadership, learning, making decisions, and moving forward collaboratively. We know that there are systems in place in some districts and not in others. However, learning how demonstration sites have implemented high leverage moves can have wide-reaching benefits. We just mentioned the importance of distributive leadership and stakeholder engagement, but would be remiss if we did not mention the importance of innovative site-based leadership to support this work. Our goals for the Demonstration Sites project are both simple and complex. We want to make sure that when school personnel or teams visit demonstration sites, or in this case, hear about their journeys, that it provides a transformational learning experience. To do this, we are setting and implementing best practices and model demonstration site replication to ensure that our visitors or participants have an experience where they are inspired and leave with ideas for implementation in their schools. We also want to create peer learning communities between demonstration sites that build professional networks in our state. Through this project, we aren't only impacting visiting schools, but are working with demonstration sites to continue to evolve and change as they learn more about their students and best practices, or as their school culture continues to change. Because one of our founding principles is that inclusion is a cultural initiative, demonstration sites show that when we put best practices in place for our students with disabilities and consider how we can implement these practices in general education context and content, it improves student outcomes for all our students in our schools. We already talked about an asset-based approach in creating a culture of collaboration across Washington State schools. An important goal for this project is to improve the social and academic outcomes for students with and without disabilities, and to show that when we do things that are better for students, it is typically better for adults too. At the end of our webinar, we want you to leave with some key takeaways that you can bring back with you to your school. This will include information, tools, and supports you can use to build, implement, and sustain an inclusive school. We know this isn't exactly the same as being able to see these schools and classrooms in action, but are thrilled you are joining us today as we share how Hidden River Middle School is using MTSS to impact student learning, student engagement, and school culture. In our April virtual site visits, our demonstration sites share their amazing journeys toward a more inclusive education for all students. These journeys occurred over a number of years and involved engaging in several high-stakes inclusionary practices. We are excited to highlight one of these inclusive practices today. Join us as we take an in-depth look at MTSS. First, we'd like to start with some polling to see who is joining us here today. Great, we have administrators, counselors, teachers, specialists, paraprofessionals, folks from the district level. Great. Well, thank you for joining us all here today. It's with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce our team from Hidden River Middle School. I'm going to hand it over to Principal Brett Willey, who will introduce the rest of his team. Thanks, Brett.
Well, thank you, Raina Marie. And I want to say thank you to all of you joining in today. I know the last few months have been a heavy lift for all of us. So if you're anything like us here, like we're just limping across the finish line. So I appreciate you taking the time. I know you guys have got a lot on your plates and lots of things to wrap up the school year. So real quickly, our team here today, we've got kind of a larger team, and that's because supporting all students takes a lot of people to pull that off. So our assistant principal is Jonathan Judy. He'll be presenting today. David Paratori is one of our central office leaders. We've got two of our co-teachers here on the special ed, the case manager side. Laura Padak and Monica Byerly are joining us. We've got two of our gen ed partners, Jenny Nelson and Robin Lampers, also been instrumental in the work and co-teaching and leading this in the building. Ashley Castillo is our representative from our life skills program. And Lily Schaefer is our counselor, and she's been instrumental in this journey as well. So real quickly, I think I got everybody there, yep. Just a little bit about our school. Hidden River is, we're in the Monroe School District. We're the smaller of the two middle schools. We're right now around 420. We've been closer to 500, and depending on the year. And we're kind of in a unique part of the district that isn't really in Monroe. It's way out towards Snohomish and Woodinville. But our demographics, if you were to look at our community as a whole, in Monroe, our school pretty much represents our community pretty equally in terms of some of the subgroups and the demographics that we look at. So the structure of the webinar today, we've kind of broken it down into three parts, and I'm going to start just give a little bit of an overview, kind of a 30,000-foot view of our MTSS approach, or Pyramid of Interventions, or RTI, kind of thinking about those three things, using those terms simultaneously, but just the cultural aspects that have established the groundwork, that fertile soil that we need to make this type of thinking work in the building. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'll turn it over to our team and highlight just the pyramid approach in itself and get into some of the specifics around pyramid of interventions and multi-tiered systems of supports. And then the last piece of our webinar, we'll get into a few of the interventions and show you what this approach will look like for two students here at Hidden River. We've changed the names of those students, but just to show you how we apply this to each student to try to meet their individual needs. One thing I will say about thinking about change theory, we know that there are technical changes, those structural pieces, kind of those level one type changes that are important. We also have that deep cultural change that is where the true shift of a building can happen. And the great thing about MTSS is interventions alone aren't going to move the needle for kids. It's that cultural piece that also has to be present. But I think this framework of a multi-tiered systems of supports, as a school engages in that work, it's a really great example of how the two types of changes go hand in hand to move a building forward. So oftentimes you might start with the technical change, but the process of engaging that will start to help a school think a little differently. So hopefully our structure today will help schools that are just sort of starting this approach. And then for those of you that are a little further down the journey, hopefully we can help give you some ideas to spur you forward. Real quick, I've got a few emails for our administrative team on there. If you need more resources or have questions, don't be afraid to email us or even give us a phone call here in Monroe. We're happy to help. We also have our handbook we've created over the last several years that has things we've stolen from other people or tools we've built to guide this work. And that is in the PowerPoint. It's also on the UW website. If you'd like to look there, there's some pretty helpful tools, I think, to help schools. And just remember, I want to just encourage you, I think we all have to remember that our system, I mean, a couple hundred years of education here in the United States was never built originally to meet the needs of everyone. Like this was a one size fits all kind of approach. And for most of that time, it wasn't a huge deal if some kids didn't make it. We now, the last 30, 40 years, know that that's no longer an option. If the kids that don't make it through our system, statistics tell us what life looks like for them, and it is not pretty. So So I just want to encourage you, we're changing decades and decades worth of a system that was not built the way we're moving towards. So this is just a slow change for the school. And we've taken each step knowing that it's going to take a long time, and 6-7 years down the road, we can look back now and see how far we've come. But it really is with the mindset that we're going to keep taking the next step forward as those things happen. And as we get into this, please focus on, we're going to try to highlight some of the guiding principles of MTSS. I think those are more important than some of the specific interventions, though that way of thinking is really critical. So as we dig into this first section, just this idea of developing a cultural ball, anytime I get the chance to talk about change, I always like to remind folks whether we're, and it's a good reminder for us as well, whether we're starting a journey or starting something new, or we're right in the middle of it and we're keep moving forward, bringing folks back to the why is so important. And we just don't do that enough in our field. I just know we've got so much coming at us. We often just launch into things and the why gets lost. And I am a firm believer that 99.9% of the people in our system are outstanding educators. They're great people. These are mission-driven folks that are here to make a difference. And when we create that compelling why for our staff, I have yet to find a teacher that just thumbs their nose at that, or a staff member, and just refuses to do it. Like our people are hungry for the why. So that's just with MTSS in particular, in terms of what we're changing, that why is really important. And for us around this, the specific part of that why we focused on for this thinking was just around our failure rates at Hidden River. When we started our journey, and I've told this story many times, we had about 8 times the percentage of students failing as our local high school. And we started to talk about this idea of responsibility and this thinking that, well, we've done our part as the adults in the building, we've taught it, it's now on the students to learn it. And my question back at that point to our staff was, how is that working for us? I mean, we have 8 times, let me just think about that, a middle school that has 8 times a failure rate as the high school we're feeding into. I mean, that's just unheard of. And when our staff started to really think about that, it was like, you're right. Like it's our job. Schools were built for kids. We're here to serve them and meet their needs. And the reality of it is, it doesn't matter if we have a kindergartner, if we have middle schoolers, if we have a 17, 18-year-old, some students don't think that far into the future. Like even if we tell them, they don't realize what the implications are if they don't make it. Some of our kids in all of our communities, just getting them here is a big deal. Like they survived the night. They got their last meal. Like that was a win for them. Or they're worried about what the weekend looks like for where I'm headed, you know, to my other parents' house. I mean, there's so many things that our kids have on their plates. To think that every single one of our students is looking that far into the future and is understanding their choices today are impacting way down into tomorrow, it's just unrealistic. And for high school staffs, like it's true. We will drag some kids across that finish line, but we have to, because what their lives will look like if we don't, we just, as educators, we can't afford to take that chance. So that was kind of the shift that we started to make. And this is not a one-time staff meeting. I mean, we're talking over several years. These conversations are still happening. And when we talk about failure, you know, because a pyramid of supports, really it's a safety net. We are trying to make sure kids don't fail. And there's a difference between allowing kids to experience failure, which we want to happen because failure is a part of learning, we know that, but we don't want them to fail. We don't want them to be failures. And we have to really we had to at least work with our staff to understand there's a big difference between experiencing failure and failing here at school. So yes, it's our job. We're going to have to roll up our sleeves. And for some kids, that's going to be a lot of work, but that's what we're committed to. So the real question is, or the next question is for schools is either where do we start? Or maybe for you, you're partway down your journey and you're thinking, okay, what is our next step? And my question back to you would be, and back to our staff is, where is the need? Like, what's the greatest need? And the guiding principle here is that we're going to build our pyramid of supports for students, our multi-tiered system, one at a time. We're just going to figure out what's the greatest need. Sometimes you might identify a couple needs, and we'll start interventions to meet that need. For us, we had 2 happen at the start. Jenny, one of our math teachers, is going to talk about Hawk Time. That's kind of our academic tier 2 intervention later. But the other one we led with was a program at lunchtime we call ZAP, and it stands for Zeros Aren't Permitted. We're not letting you fail anymore. We're putting an end to that. So kids at lunch, what we're saying to our students is, we give an assignment. We don't give a lot of assignments, but when we do, like, these are important. These are going to support your learning. And the fact that you chose not to do it, well, guess what? At lunchtime, you're going to go into a room. There's adults in there. You can eat your lunch, but we're going to make sure you get that assignment done because it's that important to support your learning. And two things about ZAP. We're 6 years in, and this is the first year we finally feel like, man, we've got this dialed in. Like, this intervention is finally doing what we need it to do. So that's one piece of it. Like, it takes time to build these interventions. And the second piece is, it's just one example of how a very technical structural change has over time helped us as a staff start to move from, this is their responsibility, it's on them, to this is our responsibility, and these are all of our kids. And when we started our journey, probably like many of you, our one intervention at Hidden River Middle School was referral to special ed. That was it. And I'll never forget, like, this was so clear to me that first year we started, I was in a pre-observation with a teacher who was doing the best that she thought, that she knew how to do. But as we talked about her planning for her class, and I asked some questions around, like, tell me the makeup of every class, like, how are you thinking about students as you plan the lesson? The first thing she did was started to talk about, well, she started with labels. I've got 3 504s, and I've got 3 ELLs, and I've got 4 IEPs. Like, that was literally the language being used. And then she said something that I had to really, like, swallow hard on. She said, I've got 4 unidentifieds. And I was like, I don't even know if I want to ask what that means, but I guess I probably need to. And I asked it, and her articulation back to me was that I've got 4 kids who should have an IEP. And she went through the reasons because I asked. And one of the students, she said, their handwriting is poor. They need an IEP. And the mentality was, we're going to ship, and this is the language I used, or they use, we talk about the SPED kids. We're going to ship them down the hall to the SPED teachers, and it's their job to kind of fix them. And I mean, talk about a burden for our 3 teachers at the time, like, shouldering that load for students with some significant needs. Like, that's just, nobody can survive that. And so over time, we have started to say, you know what, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to provide one intervention at a time, supports for kids, to make sure that we shift the responsibility from students back onto our plates where it belongs, to make sure that every kid at Hidden River is successful. So that's a quick kind of tilling the soil of the cultural piece, the shifting of thinking. And I just reiterate, building it one intervention at a time, find the need, and just continue to till that soil with staff and remind them where we're headed and why this is such important work. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Judy. He is our assistant principal currently, and he's going to talk more specifically about pyramid thinking and how we use that here at Hidden River.
Great, thanks, Brett. Before we get started on some of our concrete examples about what multi-tiered systems of support looks like here at Hidden River, we wanted to lay a little bit of groundwork on MTSS and the foundational concepts of those systems, and specifically want to talk a little bit about how we are interpreting those concepts. By doing that, that'll allow us to have some clarity on some of the language that we're using as we progress through the webinar. Many of our anchoring resources, we just wanted to note this as well, many of our anchoring resources for making sense of this work comes out of the Solution Tree PLC framework. In our journey and our quest to meet the needs of all students, we really have found no better vehicle for creating a system that provides high levels of learning for all students than our teacher teams engaging in deep, intentional, collaborative work around the essential skills that students should know and be able to do, both behavioral skills and academic skills. What those skills and levels of learning should look like, and then really being able to dial in on who's learning those skills and how are we responding to those students, and then who's not learning them and how are we responding to that group of students as well. So this is why, because of those really clear questions that the professional learning community framework has to offer, that really anchors us to that work and provides a sense of consistency and coherence in the work that we do as we're collaborating together. So just wanted to call that out. And so, yeah, we're going to dive into some of the primary guiding concepts or guiding principles, I should say, to multi-tiered systems of support. So I'm going to do that by introducing a couple of visuals here. First of all, to start, there are two primary concepts I want to highlight using this visual. The first one is that if anybody has done any work with multi-tiered systems of support in the past, or if you were to Google MTSS, the models you would typically see would be a triangle or a pyramid. You'll notice that this pyramid is inverted. What this visually represents is fundamental to the philosophy of what MTSS is and what it does for students. It shows that each tier is not a place in the system, but it's a service or an intervention that students access as a result of their demonstrated need. In other words, looking more specifically at these tiers, at tier 1, all students have access to the essential skills and services that are in place at that level. At the inverted pyramid in this model suggests that all of those services in tier 1 essentially flow downward, right? We're kind of using the visual and the power of gravity there to ensure that even if students have a heightened need for service at tier 2 or tier 3, that they're still accessing those services at the foundational level of the system. So if a student demonstrates a particular need for tier 2, they continue to access everything in tier 1, and then as needs heighten and there's more need for individualized service or support for students, there are specific things we can do at tier 3, but it's not at the cost of their access to the other interventions and systems in tier 1 and tier 2. Secondly, the conceptual framework behind multi-tiered systems of support is a way to maximize our impact. So the goal is that while all of tier 1 systems and practices and services meet the needs of all students, what we know is that we can predictably project there are some students who will need more than what we give them at tier 1. And then we can predict that there are some students that still have an even greater need for even more intensive services, and that's what we're looking at tier 3. At tier 2, just a couple words about tier 2, the systems that are in place there are already established structures and processes and routines. These are kind of what you consider like a plug and play set of interventions that are set up for small groups of students, medium-sized groups of students that can specifically and particularly target a designated need in the school. An example that Brett gave you earlier was the lunchtime work completion makeup. We know that there's going to be consistently a handful of students that are going to need that support, and so that is considered a tier 2 intervention. Around work completion. So for some students, that's not going to necessarily be enough. They might need a tier 3 intervention. Tier 3 interventions are the most intensive supports for the skills or for the behaviors that need the most intensive work. I want to re-emphasize that tier 3, again, is not a place for specific students, but it's a set of specific individualized interventions that can help students develop skill building around a specified skill. This might be related to IEP services, but it does not necessarily require identification for special education services to access. So let me say that a little bit differently. There are some students who may need interventions that are considered tier 3 interventions, but they aren't identified as special education. So it's not, for us, it's not a categorization or a qualification consideration for tier 3 services. In general, what we know about multi-tiered systems of support, the 80-15-5 up there, is that our tier 1 interventions should really meet the needs of about 80% of our students. That our tier 2 the combination of tier 1 and tier 2 should meet another 15%, and that allows us in our system to really target some interventions for about 5% of our students who are continuing to need some additional supports. All right. Moving to this next visual, you'll see there's a little bit more detail on this particular pyramid. I wanted to review with you there's some added concepts that are captured here in this particular visual. You'll see that there are two sides to this inverted pyramid. One side at the top, you can see it says school-wide team responsibilities, and on the right side, you see teacher team responsibilities. So what this shows is that the development of a true MTSS structure and system is a combination of teacher teams and the school-wide team working together. That it really is a joint effort in terms of our partnership, in terms of the support that we provide. We're going to dive into this more deeply later in the webinar, but I wanted to point out that one of the critical pieces to ensuring successful MTSS systems is that there's joint ownership among all team members. At the tier 1 level, there are certain things that the school system will provide to help ensure safe, productive learning environments. On the teacher team side, there are sets of specific actions and systems that our teacher teams attend to, ensuring that there are high quality learning opportunities and assessment opportunities in every classroom for all students. So you can see the one thing I also want to point out in regards to this 80-15-5 perspective, sometimes we get to the point in our process where we realize, man, we are really providing a lot more intervention for a lot more kids than our 80%. So I'll touch on that in just a few minutes, but essentially what that was an indicator of for us is that we need to do some work at our tier 1 to maybe shift or add some interventions to take care of the needs of that larger group of students. So it is really important to sort of shoot for those markers of 80, 15, and 5 so that we can really be effective in the work that we're doing in our support systems. One of the things that I'll point out here, our special ed team, a couple of years ago, in the interest of developing a really clear continuum of services, we actually decided, well, we're going to apply the pyramid thinking even to our students who have been identified for special education. And you'll see here, what this is just an example of is that we have gotten really used to just thinking in these pyramids, right? The idea that in any group of students, we're going to have our base foundational things that we provide for all students, knowing that we're going to probably need to have some response systems in place for providing a little more support for that second tier of needs, and then knowing that even at our highest level of support, this small group of special ed students, they may also have some even more particular heightened needs. And so the only reason we bring this up now is not to necessarily dive into the details of what's on this particular list, but to point out the fact that wherever we go in a school, we can apply this pyramid thinking to the work that we are doing. So as we, let me transition. Sorry, I'm playing with a couple different screens here. So really, again, the emphasis here is that this is the system that prioritizes meeting the needs for all students, right? So I already mentioned that the way to really prioritize ensuring a clear system is to make sure that the interventions in place at tier 1 are effectively meeting the needs of about 80% of our student population. We cannot intervene our way out of of a high quality tier 1 system. So we are frequently, as we're assessing, are we overburdened? Once again, our frequent move is to go back to tier 1 and try and determine what changes can we make to interventions that are already in place, or is there a need to develop a different intervention to really meet the needs of more students. As we engage this work, one of the things that we always kind of are asked is the idea of how. How do we do that? Well, I think a lot of our work has really stemmed around and circled around this idea of first and foremost, employing and committing to a mindset that follows an inquiry cycle model or action research. Essentially, this is just being curious. This is a really kind of structured process that calls out the different steps along the way. But this is our mental model that helps us remain in a stance of curiosity. We know that the work is really hard in terms of committing to meeting the needs of all students. And as we all know, frequently run into challenges and barriers. And so it would be easy to fall into kind of negative thinking cycles and patterns that can lead to contempt. And I think our goal is to continue to come back to being curious. So at every step of the way, this is the process we follow. If we go to one of our most intensive support tools in our school system, the behavior intervention plan, which is based on a functional behavioral assessment, this is the cycle we follow. We first quantify and identify a problem behavior that we want to work with in a single student. We create a hypothesis that for why we think the behavior is happening or occurring, what is the underlying function of that behavior. We create an action plan that accounts for, here's why we think it's happening, so here are the interventions we're going to put in place to try and meet those needs. So we create that action plan that accounts for that function, we implement that plan, and we take data. And then we evaluate and reflect on whether that plan is working. So that's an example of a system or a particular tool that we might use at tier 3. But that's just to really point out that this is the cycle of inquiry that we would go through around all of our tiers. Our teacher teams are constantly doing that around task analysis. They take an assessment and they say, okay, how did this group of students do? And they may sort those students based on the task analyses that they're doing, and then divide those students up into different groups for targeted reteaching. They execute or they act on that plan, and they collect that data on how it works. And in that process, they're able to then look back and reflect on what they learned about instruction, what they learned about students. So you can see this cycle of inquiry being really that through line for what we do all across the system of support. So over and over again, I just want to emphasize it. It's the how to. Brett had kind of mentioned that idea of taking on one intervention at a time. Later on, you'll get a glimpse at our Hidden River pyramid, and I want to just point out every single thing that is on that pyramid was a response to a particular need at a particular point in time. So reminding us all that it's adding those interventions one at a time, but it's also bringing in this mindset around this cycle of inquiry to remain curious about what we can do. So I am going to introduce to you Robin Lampers. Robin is an ELA teacher in our building, has been a co-teacher, partners with Laura, who's one of our special ed teachers in the building, who's also a part of the presentation today. But Robin is going to talk about building a tier 1 set of practices amongst our teacher team. So it's going back to the visual from a couple of slides ago. It's that upper right. It's really what it is, the bulk of the work that goes on to ensure that our instructional program is really focused on meeting the needs of all students within the classroom. Robin, here you go.
All right. So we know that good teaching begins in tier 1, and it's given to all students. So in order to give a strong foundation to our tiers of support, Teachers work in teams. Some of those teams are by subject, some are by grade level and subject. And our special education teachers are included in those teams. And in those teams, we build units with supports that are embedded, and those plans meet the needs of all of our students. So the way we approach this work is through these 5 actions. So action number 1 is to identify essential standards. So take the standards and find standards that apply to our kids, that have endurance, which means that it's valuable beyond a single test date. They should also have leverage, which means that it's valuable in multiple disciplines. And those essentials should have readiness. They provide readiness in the next grade level or level of instruction. So those are the 3 criteria that we look for when we're identifying essential standards. Once we have those essential standards identified, then we create an essential standards unit plan. So we ask ourselves, what is the essential asking of students? And we break apart, unwrap, break down, unpack. It's got a lot of different terms, but we work with the standards and we put the standards into learning targets. This takes time. A lot of times teachers want to jump to a published book or something to find the answers from somebody else. But we have found that it's really beneficial for teacher teams to work together and break apart those standards, break apart the nouns and the verbs, and see exactly what is being asked for in those essentials. And it does take time, but it has to be done by the teachers that are actually involved in teaching the standards, so that there's clarity across the teachers as to what's being expected. In this step, we convert the learning targets into student-friendly language, and we create formative and summative assessments. And we set dates for when those assessments will be given. In our cycle, in our plan, we plan time for reteaching and extensions. We don't just say, hey, when can we squeeze that in? It's actually a part of the plan. So that leads us to step 3, and that is implementing the team teaching assessment cycle. So this is where we introduce the learning targets, we begin core instruction, and in that instruction, it includes checks for understanding and some differentiation within the classroom, and sometimes outside of the classroom with other teachers that are teaching the same subject. And we will give common formative assessments that assess the standard. So as we go through the standard and as we've broken down that standard, we've identified the parts of the standard and we've created formative assessments that assess those parts of the standard. And then after we give those formative assessments, we take the assessment results and we analyze those assessment results. And using those assessment results, we provide interventions while we're continuing core instruction. So it's all a part of the cycle, the plan. After we've gone through that teaching assessment cycle, we give the common end of unit assessment for our essential standards. And once again, we collaboratively analyze those assessment results. And then step 5 is we identify students for tier 2 support by student, by standard, and by learning target. And this is where we get creative sometimes with how we meet the needs of those students. Sometimes we, within a classroom, will divide the kids into different levels and give different types of instruction. Sometimes we will flip, we'll share kids, we'll do like a big fruit basket upset, and all of the 7th grade ELA teachers are involved in this, and we'll send some of the kids to one of the teachers' rooms, and some of them will come to my room, and I will maybe do a reteach, or somebody might do an extension. So this is all a part of the team teaching assessment cycle. So as we're teaching, we're assessing and we're changing our instruction as we go. And as we're doing that, we're identifying students who need more tier 2 support. And we're really specific about what type of support they need, what standard we're working on, and what learning target we're identifying. So I'm going to send it back to Jonathan, who's going to talk about the behavioral part of Tier 1.
Great, thanks, Robin. So before I move on to the next slide, I just want to point out the page numbers on this particular slide correspond to some specific tools that we use with our teams, and it's in the handbook. So that's what those page numbers are referring to. So like Robin said, I want to talk a little bit about, as we go back to that visual of the pyramid that I showed you a couple of minutes ago, where on the left side, it's that partnership between the teacher teams and the school-wide systems. The left side having to do with our school-wide systems, and the right side having to do with the work that our teacher teams do, which is kind of a quick overview that Robin just gave you. So this is not a training on behavioral support. So this is not going to do a ton of justice to the really deep work that could be done in a week-long or even a lifelong training on supporting positive behaviors. But I wanted to point out that as we are building interventions for our school-wide systems, our primary guiding pillars here are that anything we expect students to do, we have to be committed to teaching them, to reinforcing and celebrating those skills, and then to respond consistently to them. So all of the systems that we develop in terms of our school-wide systems of support for that side of the pyramid, what we want to do is make sure that those 3 principles are in place, that they're in place for Tier 1. So if we have expectations around our timeframes or our work deadlines, or if we have expectations on how a student might be able to resubmit their work, we're going to teach them that routine. We're going to teach them what that looks like, how to do that, and then we're going to reinforce and celebrate them. A perfect example, a different example would be our common school values. That those are, we go through different norm setting exercises that are school-wide and in different environments, and then we have systems in place to reinforce and celebrate students meeting those expectations. And then we have specific response systems that all teachers use to when unexpected behavior shows up as well. And those are really the principles that should be in place at Tier 1, at Tier 2, and Tier 3. So even if we are dealing at the highest level of support, if there's a really individualized behavior plan in place for one specific student, what we're going to do is commit to making sure the conditions are in place for that student to be able to learn the skills they need to learn around that particular behavior. And then we're gonna reinforce the heck out of when we see that behavior happening. And then we're gonna have a response routine in place for if some of the more problem behaviors show up again. So just wanted to again point out those pillars, that those are the through line through all three tiers of the system of support, and really those are some of the kind of primary behavioral principles that we put in place on that side of the pyramid. We're gonna transition here into our next section, into really what does this look like on the ground here more at Hidden River. We've sort of kind of given you a high-level view, a big picture, and now we want to introduce Jenny Nelson. Jenny's a math teacher in our building, and takes a ton of leadership, especially in helping us think through our systems interventions, and is a great champion of this work. So Jenny Nelson.
All right, so when we started off putting the pyramid together, we just kind of went, okay, how do we even begin with all of this? So the way we started organizing our pyramid was we just started brainstorming. So it was, what are we doing? That's really how we started out, is what are we doing currently in our school to help kids? Whether that's core instruction, how paras are helping kids, how teachers are helping kids. It was just, what do we do in our school? We went through everything and we just wrote it all down. And then from there, it was, let's place this into tiers. Where does this fit? Is this a tier 1? Is this a tier 2? Or is this a tier 3? Really being able to distinguish what do we already have in place. And then we started to come up with, okay, what are some things that we want to start doing? So we talked about ZAP. I know that Brett brought ZAP up a little bit. Hawk time, which is something I'm going to talk a little bit about, is another intervention that we do. Some things that we started kind of thinking through of what are things that we need for kids, and then we started putting those into tiers. So if you want to go to the next slide. If you look at this pyramid, you're going to see that we have all of our tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 supports that we're using within our school. And then we've got some asterisks, so like Hawk Academy, Adopt a Hawk. Our old pyramid had a ton of asterisks on it because those were some things of, some teachers are doing this. This is what we need everybody to do. We really want to implement it. So when it came to like daily agenda use, that was one of the things where we went, we need everybody to do this, and it's something that we're going to commit to have all kids do that. So as we kind of went through these different things, we started to implement more and more, and now you can see we have a pretty good list together as a school of, these are the things that teachers do as a team. These are the things our whole school does as a team, and these are things that we can do next if a kid needs more help, and that's our tier 2. And then our tier 3, that's our really individualized, specific per student. So an example I want to share with you is our Hawk time, because when I look at this list, or when we initially looked at a different pyramid, we went, man, that's so much stuff. What are we, like, how do we even get there? But for our staff, we started off with talking about Hawk time, and it really came about where we were sitting together. We were all sitting together at a potluck that we do every year during our conferences as a staff. We're sitting there, and one of the teachers, she gets up in front of the whiteboard. We're all sitting and having dinner, and we had this Hawk time. And this Hawk time was basically a study hall. It's a 25-minute study hall for kids, and that's all it was. And so we went, we need this to be actual tier 2 instruction. We need this for kids. We need it to be, they need extra math help. They need extra science help. So we started off with, okay, let's start stamping kids and having them go to a certain teacher for priority. Then we really dug deeper. So each year we are getting deeper and deeper. And this is what we've had this last year, is now we have every day, there's a specific teacher for specific grade levels, and each teacher can put kids' names under it. And this is a place where kids can, at the end of 4th period, they look, they see where they need to go for their tiers 2 instruction, and that's where they go. And it's been a really cool, just kind of evolution of where you can start, and every year if you can work together as a team and just come together and say, how do we make this better? That's how we truly get into those good quality tier 2 interventions. With our pyramid, the next person that's going to be talking is Lily and Monica, and they're going to talk through kind of what our pyramid process looks like. So as we look at kids, tier 1's not working, tier 2's not working, what do we do next? That's where our pyramid process comes in, and we have meetings about this, and Lily and Monica are going to tell you more about that.
So our pyramid meeting form is linked here, and it's also in our shared handbook. Our pyramid meeting starts when a parent, teacher, staff member requests a team meeting to discuss student concerns. During our meeting, we focus on student strengths, we discuss concerns, and then we try to identify the root of the concern. So to tie to what Jonathan was talking about earlier, then we're really able to align our interventions to the root of the concern and the student need. We then schedule follow-up meetings about 6 weeks later to assess and reevaluate the impacts of the interventions we are trying to determine if there are more interventions we need to try or additional steps to support the student. Monica Byerly will now share 2 student stories.
Yeah, so a referral to our pyramid process can come in a number of ways. So I'm going to talk about 2 different students. First one is going to be around academic concerns. So I'm going to talk about Annie. She's a 6th grader at our school. She's really kind. She loves to help her peers. She is kind of a unique, kind of a quirky kid. She loves to distract herself with her own materials, especially when it's time to initiate work. So these are some of the behaviors that we kind of see in her. Her parents started our pyramid process specifically with a concern around math, and wanted to have a meeting to discuss having Annie assessed for special education services. So we use iReady as our district assessment, and the initial district assessment placed her to 2nd grade level in math. And then inside the classroom, the general education classroom, she consistently performed below standard on our grade level essentials. So our first step was to enroll her in one of our Tier 3 math classes. One of the benefits of our Tier 3 math class is that it's not a special education class, so we are able to identify students that do not have IEPs and put them in a class. So she fit this, this support. So we put her in this class in early October, and we were able to provide her some instruction around how to use tools to solve math problems. Just different tools, how to use multiplication tables, for example, how to use math problem solving guides that we use to pull out key information. Within 4 to 6 weeks, she took her next benchmark assessment in iReady, and she had gone from a 2nd grade level to a 3rd grade level. So we'd already seen an immediate impact. And what happens when a student, when a student starts showing that gain, they start to gain confidence. They start to learn exactly what they do need to self-advocate for in terms of where they're stuck, clearly identify where their problem is at. And then when inside of our Tier 3 model, our math support classes, we can offer a small group setting where we can work with the student. And then in this case, this student, once she started feeling confident, she was able to work with her peers, which really built up her skills. By January, she took another assessment and she had jumped to a 4th grade level. So at this point, she was also approaching proficiency in our grade level standards in the classroom. And I think it's important to note for the student that the level of confidence she gained and the tools that she learned to overcome these obstacles are what really helped support her from being that student that was distracting herself at the start of class from getting to work to actually being able to identify what she needed in order to problem solve or get extra help on her math work. So the next student I want to talk about is another 6th grade student, and we're going to call him Seth. Seth is a very kind student. He's helpful, respectful to adults. He's very creative. He really wants to fit in with his peers, but he has a very negative self-perception around his abilities. He uses negative self-talk a lot. In class, he would often start crying when he felt overwhelmed. This would lead to him shutting down in classes, and he really couldn't even show us what he was capable of doing. And so this is a student whose behaviors we were trying to identify what was going on with his behaviors, because his behaviors were almost self-sabotaging, just, you know, really referring to himself, calling himself stupid and things like that. and that would cause this shutdown. So he was referred for our pyramid process by his teachers. Seth also self-advocated for our math support class. I think he had heard about it, and I think he thought, I want to be in that class. And at the time, he was not completing any of his work in class. He wasn't even able to complete the iReady assessment in a timely fashion in order for us to determine if he would have been a student that qualified for the services. But because of his inability to finish assignments, his organizational struggles, his self-confidence, we decided to enroll him in our Tier 3 math support class. So when he finally did finish that initial diagnostic test, he came in around a 4th grade level. So initially for a student who's in 6th grade, this would not be, we wouldn't initially put him in a Tier 3 class with a marker like fourth grade level. But for the behavior reasons and the emotional support, we decided to try him in math support. So he started there in November, and he also started using a behavior tracker, and this was something that he could take around to his teachers to each class, and it helped him focus on some key areas, which was managing his materials, engaging in classwork, and then positive self-talk. So it took him a bit of time, but slowly he was able to manage those materials for his courses. He was able to identify and ask for help around assignments that he needed help with, and ask for very specific help on maybe one-to-one instruction when he needed it in our small group setting. So from here, his engagement when he went to the gen ed class started to increase. Because he was completing his assignments and assessments, he was feeling a little bit less overwhelmed, a little bit more successful. By February, he had increased his district assessment level to a 6th grade level. So here we have a student who had a lot of negative self-talk, low self-confidence, and he gained enough confidence inside this small group instruction setting to then be able to demonstrate it, not only in our district assessment, but also around grade level essentials, that he could perform at grade level. And what this did was this increased his self-confidence around, just knowing that he did in fact know these things, and that he received services that helped him achieve this. So Robin's going to move on. She's going to take over and talk about what our Tier 3 support classes look like.
Okay. And Monica, thanks for sharing those stories. Before we go into Tier 3, I just invite people to share in the chat what are some tiered systems that you may already have in place in your schools right now. And with that, we'll go ahead and head into Tier 3 supports. Thank you.
Okay, so Tier 3 classes are not replacement classes. They're additional class time that are built into a student's schedule. Students do not have to be identified as special education students or have an IEP to access these classes. They are it's based on, I'll talk about the success criteria in just a moment. Currently, these classes meet 2 to 3 days per week, like every other day for a full class period. Because of our scheduling restrictions, students miss an elective in order to take these classes. We try very hard to make sure that they miss the elective that is going to impact them the least. So for some kids, that's missing PE. For others, it's missing health, maybe 6th grade social studies. Some students are in both ELA and math support on alternating days. So we have entrance and exit criteria that looks at least 3 data points to determine eligibility. We try to keep these classes to below 8 or 9 students, and preferably we try to put them with students that have similar needs based on the data that we collect. So these support classes are highly intentionally focused on the students' needs. The majority of the time, the classes are about filling in gaps that students missed sometimes 2 or 3 years ago for whatever reason. Sometimes it's basic reading skills, others, or basic number skills, for example. Other times we spend our Tier 3 class time pre-teaching certain concepts. I know math, I teach the ELA support class, and I know math does quite a bit of pre-teaching in their Tier 3 support class. The way I do it in ELA is that I try to use a text that the students will see again in ELA class to teach basic reading skills. For example, if I know that a certain article will be read in ELA class, I might put that article in front of the students 2 to 3 days before to use for finding, say, the main idea and supporting details of the article. That way, when the article is pulled out in ELA class, the student has already seen the article and knows what the article is about. This boosts confidence. It helps the student access the grade level standard that is being taught. So in that way, they're getting support for learning the reading skills, but they're also meeting grade level standards. So there's a lot of this has to do with increasing confidence, and it helps to exit some of the students. So students are able to enter and exit these Tier 3 classes throughout the year. Some students have had even request joining these classes for additional support. So those are specific classes that are built into a student's schedule. So Laura is going to talk about what Tier 3 looks like in the classroom.
Thanks, Robin. Hi, everybody. There are many examples of Tier 3 supports occurring, and those supports being interwoven into many aspects of a student's school day. So during this webinar, you've been able to hear some of these examples. As Robin just highlighted our Tier 3 intervention classes, we wanted to provide some examples of how the work that occurs there carries over into students' core content classes. While Tier 3 support classes occur outside of the academic content classroom, meaning they're a separate supplemental class, Tier 3 support does not occur in isolation. Students receive Tier 3 supports within their content classes, and this can look different depending on the student. Because Tier 3 support classes often pre-teach skills, students are able to engage in their academic content with a sense of readiness and confidence, increasing their overall engagement in their learning, which Robin talked about a little bit. Tools and resources that are taught and utilized in Tier 3 support classes, such as maybe a number line, a graphic organizer, or a multiplication table, are then provided for students in academic classes as a way to access the content more fully. For students who are receiving special education services, there's collaboration between Tier 3 support teachers and case managers so that those students can be working on individualized skills, which then help them in their academic class environment, which is really important. And finally, Tier 3 support classes give teachers the opportunity to discover and focus on areas where students are struggling most. And this then informs their teaching in the academic classroom setting. So this creates more meaningful and productive individualized goals for students who need the most support without taking away the valuable time that they spend in general education or their access to that core content and that academic programming. So those are some ways that Tier 3 supports show up in general education classes. At this time, I'd like to introduce you all to Ashley Castillo. Ashley teaches in our life skills program, and she consistently looks for ways to integrate students with low incidence disabilities into general education programming. She's going to talk with us today about Tier 3 supports as an access point for all students.
Thanks, Laura. So Tier 3 support classes provide supports for all students. For example, Tier 3 support classes are an access point for SLC students or students with low incidence or significant disabilities. Because Tier 3 classes are in place already, it gives opportunities for students who might be placed in self-contained settings to participate in more general education with their peers, and in turn have opportunities to gain access to content that is near or at grade level. Because there's more freedom and flexibility around what skills students work on, Tier 3 classes can focus on prior skills for some students while focusing on newer skills for students who may be performing significantly below grade level due to their disabilities. At this time, I'd like to introduce David Parator, the Executive Director of Student Services. He's going to walk us through some data around least restrictive environments.
Thanks, Ashley. And as Rena Marie and Brett said at the beginning, MTSS is not a special education initiative. It's really more of a cultural shift. I think it's perfect that as special education director, I have just the last piece of the presentation to talk about some of the impacts that MTSS does have on students with disabilities who are served with IEPs. And the one thing that I just wanted to show just real briefly is, as you build your MTS supports and you change your culture within your schools, your special education data also follows. It really shows that as you're doing the right thing for students, you see improved results. So if you look at our least restrictive environment, 5 years ago, when Nick French and I came into the district as a new special education administrative team, our least restrictive environment was showing exactly what Brett was talking about the past practice at Hidden River was. It was showing that when students are on IEPs, they go to a place for their special education services. At Hidden River Middle School, 5 years ago, their percentage of students that were in general education, that 80 to 100% of the time, was under 50% of the time. So that shows if they were identified with a disability, they were getting replacement services, which also means then they are not getting their core instruction. They were missing out on that tier 1 instruction. What you can see now is as the team at Hidden River has built out their pyramid of interventions, where all students are receiving their tier 1 supports, a vast majority of the students are in the general education classrooms. Almost 80% of the, at least 80 to 100% of their day, the results are really showing. We still do have students with low incidence disabilities, and we recognize those students, do need additional replacement services at times. But as Ashley was talking, those students also are benefiting from those tier 1 supports, and those supports are built into that inclusive environment of Hidden River. The final slide also is, not only does it feel good and feel right to be doing this for students with disabilities, what we've been seeing as the data shows, our growth rates for students on disabilities, as they're getting that increased exposure to their core curriculum and all those tier 1 supports, their data is also showing that they are making tremendous growth towards standards. At Hidden River, and this is our last year's data regarding our growth scores for combined growth scores for ELA and math, shows that Hidden River, all students' growth scores were at a 7.5. Our students with disabilities were actually showing higher growth rates than the general population. So that shows, again, our students are able to learn, and as you build that culture to get that inclusive environment and exposure to all the core curriculum, the results will follow. And as Brett was talking, and all the team has been talking, this wasn't an immediate turnaround for the school, but this is a process of the work of the staff at Hidden River, and it really is that cultural shift. And I'll just, my final statement will be, as you walk into a school where that culture shift has happened, you can feel it in the conversations that you have with teachers. As special education director, I have conversations not just with the special education teachers, but it's the general education teachers as well that are reaching out and really trying to figure out what interventions are best going to meet the needs of the students. And it's really that all means all philosophy that once you get that culture built in, your MTSS supports are really primed for success.
All right, well, we're coming to the end of our webinar. Last slide, I won't read through it. Just some of the guiding principles. I actually just threw one on there, the very last one. Don't forget to celebrate your growth. That's huge. In fact, that should be maybe towards the top. The last slide there, we wanted to share with you some of the resources we've used. As Jonathan mentioned, a lot of these are from the Solution Tree folks. I'm rereading one of these books right now. It's the Transforming School Culture there by Anthony Mohabit. I'm sure many of you have read it. Man, that is a great book. I'm getting ready to go to Monroe High School to be the principal there, and kind of in a part of this is starting some of this work over and taking our own advice here at Hidden River. And that book is a great book just for thinking about this giant system that we're shifting and the different staff members that we're going to have that we need to bring along. And so I encourage you to pick that one up. It's a great one. And these are some of the other ones that we've used that are really powerful. So I'll just end just with a quick story. I know most of you probably been to the PLC, seminars and workshops, and I'll never forget my first one was in around 2006. I remember sitting with Rick Dufour and never heard him before. I didn't really even know what PLC meant or stood for. And that first presentation, man, that guy had me hooked. And I just remember him talking about, like, the only thing that we're bound by is when the buses drop the kids off and when they leave. Everything else, and yes, we've got contracts to deal with and staff to work with and different challenges. But really, if you think about it, the time we have the kids from the time they get here to when they leave, like, everything else is up to us. And that's, we've got a long way to go, but we've just really bought into that we can do so much with the time we have. We just need to think a little differently. And it's so powerful to have lots of educators from a school, like, putting their brains to solve some of these problems. And as Jenny mentioned, I've been here 7 years, and one of the watershed moments for me, as I leave this school and go to another one, is remembering that potluck we had probably 4 years ago, where we were working on Hawk Time. It was between conferences, kind of that downtime between afternoon and evening sessions, and we just sat there and we all brought food and we whiteboarded out, how do we fix Hawk Time? We got to get this thing better. And it was just such a beautiful moment to see a staff trying to do that intervention particularly better. So we hope that's been helpful, motivating, and inspiring for you. And I'm sure there's lots of questions. And so Rena Marie, we'll kick it back to you. And if we have some time, we'd love to try to answer some of those questions that people might have.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much, Hidden River. That was an amazing presentation, a lot of great information. I think you guys did a great job responding to some of our questions in the Q&A in the chat. One I wanted to share is somebody asked about envisioning schedules to accommodate interventions and other levels of support. So that big scheduling piece, how do you make this all fit in and happen?
Well, if I understand the question right, so kind of like master scheduling type stuff.
Right.
So we, one of the things we did was we wanted to create that solid tier 2 academic. I think we started at the end of the day, and then we ended up moving it before lunch. But we just shaved a few minutes off of every class, and to create the space for it, like Jenny mentioned, it literally was study hall when we started. A lot of schools have done that, but every year we just try to make it more and more intentional. So that's one way. I think we cut down, like, passing period. We're a small school. Kids don't need like 5 minutes every period to transition. So we shaved some time there. We took our lunch time down. We had these really long lunches, and so we took a little bit of time from there and went from 3 to 2 lunches. So that we were able to do some things creatively there. And then, like, as far as building the master schedule, we take a lot of time, but if you really just stop and pause and really dig into a master schedule, there's a lot of flexibility that you can create within the schedule. It takes a lot longer, but to really go kid by kid and try to build those classes out, and don't just have a computer generate your schedule for you, that's been a way, because when I came here, we have received no additional staffing or funding for what we do. And we had one lap class when I got here, title lap type class. And so we've created all these tier threes type classes with the same amount of FTE. Like the staffing model has not changed. We've just been really, really intentional in how we build the schedule. So it's doable. It just takes a team, and it takes some creativity and just the willingness to make it happen.
Yeah, great. And a follow-up to that related, somebody asked, how long is hawk time?
Jonathan, you want to take that one?
Sorry. Hawk time is about 25 minutes every day. As Jenny explained earlier, it's we rotate through who has that priority, that top priority in terms of the content teams and grade level. So yeah, 25 minutes every day.
Okay, great. I've got one last question I'd like to put to you. Somebody asked, do students with low incidence disabilities also get tier 3 supports in the general education classrooms?
Ashley,
They
I think
can't
that was for you.
answer that. So we
Thanks.
look at each student individually and their needs and their abilities and their strengths. So yes, we have had some students able to access general education in either tier 3 or in general education, while there's others who still need the really structured support of a 1-to-1 or that type of ratio. So it depends on the student and their needs.
Their needs, very
And
individualized.
we've actually, to piggyback off Ashley, we've had a handful of kids in our life skills program that we've exited because it's like, well, they were identified to be in life skills, but as we actually looked at what they could do and raised the bar, they really didn't belong in there. So just the process of trying to meet their needs often will reveal that we've got students misplaced all throughout our system.
Wonderful, thank you. We'd like to give a tremendous thank you to our Hidden River School for sharing an in-depth look at MTSS, a promise to every child. We invite our attendees to share in the chat, respond to these 2 questions. The first being, what have you heard today that demonstrates a multi-tiered system of support and how that's important for essential practices for an inclusive schools? Also, from what you've learned today, what are some initial steps you can take and apply in your buildings? A lot of great stuff, but yeah, our important goal of this work is that we have meaningful takeaways, and we'd love to hear what you are going to be able to take and do, and start with those small steps. I hear people saying we're hoping to implement math and ELA seminars next year, regular changes to which kids go to which seminar, flexibility of moving kids into and out of tier 2 and tier 3 supports. Yeah, definitely. When you have those systems in place, it's easier to flex and move through it as individual needs change for our students. Great. Well, please keep sharing that in the chat box. Next, we'd like to welcome you to learn more about our demonstration sites project and OSPI's Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. Here's our websites that you can check out, and you also can email us at uwdemosites@uw.edu. Also, please visit our website. We'll be posting a recording of this webinar along with folder with the resources and artifacts presented today. Hidden River has an amazingly comprehensive handbook. They've referenced it and showed you their pages, and they've been so gracious as to share their handbook, and that's going to be available on the website as well. And lastly, we'd like to invite everybody to join in a collaborative activity. Part of the goal here with our demonstration sites is to have far-reaching benefits across the state of Washington. So if you could open a browser to pollev.com/UW Hearing Center, we'll put that URL in the chat box, and just drop a pin to let us know where you're joining us from today. That would be great. Great. We've got folks from for Spokane, ESD 101. Okay, and we've got in the chat Okanagan School District. We'll make sure we get that included in our map. Okay, got ESD 189 with Snohomish. ESD 121, King County. Great. One, Adams County, Okanagan. Oh, great. ESD 123, Franklin County. Great. Skagit County. We have people joining us from Pierce County as well. Thank you. The poll will be up and active, so you can continue to visit that and drop a pin to let us know where you're joining us from. And we would love to get feedback about our session today. This will give us information we can use to effectively share demonstration sites, inclusionary practices, and webinar format in the future. Please click this link and fill out the brief survey through Google Forms. The survey is anonymous. Molly will send clock hour forms to those who are in attendance after the webinar. We'll also be sending a link for this evaluation form. We'll email it out to attendees. And great. We would like to thank our partners, OSPI and CSTEP, for their partnership in this project. And another tremendous thank you to Hidden River Middle School for your inspiring work. Thanks to you all for joining us today to learn more about inclusionary practices and for envisioning how you might take some of what you learned today and apply it to your schools. We hope you will join us for future webinars and that when our schools' doors do open again, you will take advantage in person of visiting our Washington State demonstration sites. Thank you, everyone.